Hello everyone, Jacob here. In today's lesson, we're going to be talking about this conversational expression, not to mention. And it's often used like this. We'll say not to mention or not to mention that, and then we'll have a full sentence. And in Korean, this means 뭐뭐뭐 말할 것도 없다. Or in some situations, it's very similar to 게다가, so I put up that translation as well. And we actually talked about 게다가 in a previous lesson. We saw that 게다가 means on top of that, or plus. You could also say also or in addition. Also is just very common, and in addition is a bit more formal, so I think it's good when my students use these expressions as well. And now there's another one that you can use. You could say not to mention. Alright, and so basically all of these expressions, not to mention, on top of that, plus, are used when you want to add something to what you were saying. So let's go ahead and look at an example. High school students are often tired. It's true that in Korea, high school students are often tired. Why? Because they study a lot. I have heard that high school students tend to study kind of all day, every day, even at night they go to hagwons. So this is one of the reasons that high school students are tired. But I think there's another reason. There's another even kind of more obvious reason. So I could say not to mention they barely sleep at all. Alright, so I actually think that this is kind of the more obvious, the bigger reason. If you don't sleep, you're going to be tired. So this is how we usually use this expression, not to mention. We'll give a reason or we'll say something, and then you add to it by saying not to mention, and then saying something that is kind of almost so obvious that you don't even really need to mention it. So that's the idea behind this expression, not to mention. And in Korean, this would just translate to kind of this thing up here, 말할 것도 없다. So I would say, 차지 않은 것은 말할 것도 없다. Okay, in this example. Let's look at a second example. I recently saw a movie and I thought it was really bad. The story was boring. And the dialogue was cheesy. Cheesy means 유치하다. Alright, and I'm actually not going to tell you the name of the movie. I'm just going to tell you why I didn't like it. The story was boring and the dialogue was cheesy. But that wasn't the only reason. There was another reason. So I could say not to mention the acting was horrible. Okay, and I actually think that this was kind of the biggest reason why this movie was bad. The acting was horrible. It was the most kind of apparent, the most obvious reason why it was a bad movie. So usually that's how we use this not to mention expression. We'll give reasons or we'll say something, and then we'll kind of save the most obvious part, the most obvious reason for the end. You'll say not to mention, and then you'll really kind of make your point. So that is how we use it in this kind of situation, kind of at the beginning of a sentence. But there's another way that we can use it, and I want to go over that before we wrap up this lesson. So let's go down a little bit, and let's look at a second way that we can use it. You could say subject, verb, object, and then usually there's a comma, and then we'll have not to mention, and then you can put a noun or an ing verb. Alright? And let's look at an example. I can't even cook ramen. I can't even cook ramen. Not to mention something like 김치 찌개. So I can't even cook ramyeon, not to mention something like kimchi jjigae. Let me just put not to mention in green to highlight it. So what does this mean? Or what are we doing in this sentence? Basically, in this sentence, I'm not really adding something. I'm basically kind of stressing or emphasizing how bad I am at cooking. I can't even cook ramyeon. Not to mention something like kimchi jjigae. Kimchi jjigae is more difficult to cook than ramyeon, but ramyeon is still pretty easy to cook. So if I can't cook ramyeon, then it's very obvious that I can't cook something like kimchi jjigae. So I don't even really need to mention that. So we say not to mention something like kimchi jjigae. And in this case, it is a little bit different. We are using this more kind of to stress or to emphasize the fact that I really can't cook well at all. All right? And in this kind of example, we can change not to mention. We can use let alone. Okay, some people like to use not to mention. Some people use let alone. So I could say, I can't even cook ramyeon, let alone something like kimchi jjigae. But still, in Korean, it will still have the same kind of translation. You will still use 말할 것도 없다 to translate this in Korean. Alright, so I hope you understood this lesson. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.